just now.
Okay. All right.
Okay, let's try refreshing again.
All right, now.
All right, now we're good. No,
with the computer here.
Stand by.
With the computer here at the yeah, we're live now. I see it. So.
Okay, mine says live. Mine says live, but it's got a please stand by.
Yeah, give it a moment.
Okay.
With the computer here at the office, I actually am connected to the wireless router, and I'm plugged directly into the modem.
Really?
Yeah, and it keeps a dual connection.
Yeah. Does your modem have like switcher ports on it? So
Yes.
you can plug. Okay, so you can do that actually.
But I actually the box that came from the phone company.
Yeah.
And it's some kind of a special deal because we live so close to where they are, and they're able to give us a super fast signal, and it's right up here. And so we come out of there and go into the wireless router, but it's got several ports, and so I go from my computer directly in there. Now, if I'm not connected to the wireless router, I can't print any of the network printers because I'm not connected to the router through that. But as long as I keep both of those connections up, it works fine.
Cool. Well, the modem that we have is the DOCSIS 3, but it's straight. You hook it up to the cable and then run the modem to the router. It doesn't give you an option of tapping into it in addition to the one that goes out. Let's see. All right, I've got that we are starting with verse 36.
Yes. Yeah.
Let's see.
Chapter 7, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Make sure I'm not. And we're not doing any of the specials of the week.
Correct.
Until we return.
All right.
Okay, that might be something to mention at the beginning of show prep too.
I do hear a little background noise now.
That's probably on my end.
Okay.
I'm in the process of trying to get the audio only going, and so you're hearing the stream play from the remote login.
I take it you're at home. I take it you're at home, John, right?
Yeah.
No, you remodeled the office.
Yeah, that's nice.
Let's see.
They put a bed in there.
Yeah, it's that day bed. This is our guest room / work room / craft room,
etc., etc., etc.
Yeah.
We have one of those. Most valuable room in the house.
Let's see. Nobody's with us except for Randall and 2 viewers.
Yeah.
I didn't put anything on Facebook.
I know some of the people like Christopher. I know he's not here consistently, but his wife is having a baby today, so Rena.
So what's his excuse?
Yeah, well.
Something to do in the waiting room, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there you go. So I mean.
Honey, don't scream so loud. I need to be able to listen.
Yeah. Shh. Yeah.
That wouldn't put him in the doghouse, right?
Okay, let's see. I've got my second screen going here.
I'm going to try to post something.
Okay, let me drop something to Facebook real quick. And Twitter. Let's see. Yeah, if all goes according to plan, we should be able to do the study next week. I don't know what the internet connection is going to be like, where we're going to be staying, and so we'll have to. I should have a good idea of it by Monday or Tuesday.
Well, you're welcome to make about 100-mile trip. Come to my house. You can sit next to me.
Yeah, I see that. All right, family, I got some news for you. We're going to get up early, so very early.
Yeah, 6 o'clock. So, yeah. What time do they meet in Vista? Is it 7:30 or 7?
7:30. Yeah.
7:30. Yeah. We don't have the flyer, so.
I'm like 95% certain of that.
Yeah, I'm going to try to get out there one night next week. That's my plan. So.
Loved it. Well, of course, we'll be seeing you on Thursday, regardless. So.
Yeah, the following week, exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm still gonna try to get out there for the meeting. That's what I hope to do. It's just what happens happens.
Well, let me know, and I'll plan a special sermon just for preachers.
What, the sins of Tom?
No, patting each other on the back so we feel better.
Oh, there we go. Hey, I like that one. I like that one.
I don't know. Yeah, I tend to find myself being more critical of preachers because I am one, so I feel like I can criticize them better.
Right. Yeah.
And not so much criticizing assumed motives, but just actions I've seen in the past sometimes, hint at some things that shouldn't be there.
Right.
And
oh, I understand that.
let's see.
So, anyways. Okay, we've got almost 10 after here.
Okay.
7 after.
Huh? I got 11:01 on my computer clock.
I've got 9:07.
Oh, wow. Sorry, guys. Yeah, my iPad's telling me it's 11:07.
Yeah.
Oh,
okay,
that's Apple time.
Yeah.
All right, you were right. We were later than what I thought it was.
Yeah,
Okay.
and like I said, we're just waiting to see somebody else is going to join us. Like, so
All right, well, I've sent out a new Facebook update.
I guess since I haven't been here for 2 weeks, people have dropped off. I'm so sorry.
That's
Yeah,
what they were
we-
saying, Tom.
We were trying to tell them you'd be back, but they said, nope, we're gone.
Right.
Well, I'm thankful for the viewers that are here. I'm not going to complain about who's not here.
Oh, I'll tell you what, we got some of our favored ones. Okay. Now, one quick question. I don't know if I'm going to be coming in high definition today, so we'll just have to see how that goes. Okay, so 1 Corinthians 7, verse 36. We'll give some introductory thoughts and comments at the very beginning. We'll remind people that we're not going to do the specials until we start back in August. Let them know about next week.
Et cetera, et cetera.
Yep. All righty. Are we ready?
Yeah, I sent out a few announcements, so maybe folks who aren't thinking about it will jump in.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Let me know when we're ready, Paul, and we'll kick it off.
You're cued and ready to go.
All righty. 3, 2, 1. Greetings. I'm John Duvall. Welcome to the Truth Factor discussion, coming to you from our brand new studio in Edmond, Oklahoma. Well, not really a brand new studio. I'm here at the house today because we're in the process of gearing up for our trip. But our gentlemen are where they're supposed to be. And this was not a rehearsed introduction, as you can tell. Good morning, Paul. See if you can save this and make it a little bit better.
Oh, you're doing fine, John. Appreciate the fact that even though you're getting ready to leave soon, that you're able to join us for the study today. And we have several in our chat that are here, and maybe some who weren't able to watch us live but are viewing this at a later date. And we're glad that you're ready to study with us. If you are live, click on the chat room there and just click on the word guest below the video window, and you'll be able to put in a guest name, hopefully your name, and you'll be able to join us, and we'll introduce your comments and questions in our study today. Tom, good to see you back today.
Yeah, it is good to be back. Having been with my son 2 weeks ago up there in that area, I heard you all talk a little bit about the Bible program there at that particular camp. If I can just real quickly say something that's interesting about that camp, it sounds like it's on a 2-year cycle, but actually it's designed for people to return year after year after year if they want to. There is a first-year curriculum and then a returning student curriculum. So that's kind of interesting. And if you want to know more about that, I'd be glad to tell you later on. But anyways, the other thing, last week I had a doctor's appointment, had to reschedule it, found out I do have a heart. And all things are going well at this time. It is good to be here to study the Word of God, once again, having been gone for a couple of weeks. How are you doing, Daniel?
I'm doing wonderful, brother. Thank you. And I hope everybody listening is doing well also. I appreciate the time that you've taken out of your day to be with us. We really cherish this moment that we get to spend with all of you and with each other to study God's Word. There's really nothing better we could do than to delve into learning more about God and how He deals with situations through His Word. And so I just look forward to getting into it. So I'll pass it back over to you guys.
The plans for the upcoming weeks, just kind of let everybody know, is we're going to have one more study next week, Lord willing. I may or may not have a visitor with me in the study. The local preacher there in Vista is David Fetterman, and depending on his schedule and depending on where we can have the study from, I'll see if he can join me. And if you'll remember last year when I was out there in the springtime, Brother sorry, my brain just went to sleep on me. Brother Stouffer, Gary Stouffer, there we go, finally. He sat in with us. He sat in the study with us, and so, but his health has not been very good. They had to put a new pacemaker in and developed severe infection, and so they had to take it out and get the infection cleared up, put it back in, from what I understand, and so he's on a good solid round of antibiotics, and so if he's filling up to par, we may see if he'd like to sit in as well. Worst case scenario, I won't be able to do the study, and the three of y'all can proceed next week by yourselves if you would like. Just kind of throw that out there.
Oh, thanks.
But we got plans though, so we'll see.
Yeah.
And then after that, we're going to be on a break for 3 weeks, and we'll resume the study. I think we said August the 6th. Should be August the 6th, yeah.
Right.
All right, any thoughts before we continue with our study through 1 Corinthians chapter 7?
Yeah, one other quick observation that we just recently talked about here. We have suspended our talks at the end dealing with the various word of the week, place of the week, and all those things.
Yes.
We've done that, and we're going to resume that in August. So
That's
just
right.
to let everybody know, if you're wondering where those are, we haven't completely abandoned them. It's just dealing with 1 Corinthians 7. The decision was made to be able to devote more time considering everything that's associated with that chapter, or the controversy that's associated with that chapter. So.
Exactly. Okay, well, let's go ahead and begin this morning. We are picking up, and if you're wondering what I'm looking up at, I've got a TV on my wall in here, so that's my second monitor for today. Hang on a minute, I've not started. Hang on.
Okay, go ahead.
We're going to talk about instrumental music.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
John stepped, actually didn't step away, but he's having to be away for a moment. Did not anticipate that he would have a phone call, but I believe, as he mentioned there, we're in verse 36 or verse 37, gentlemen?
36.
36.
Yep, verse 36.
And so that's where we are today, and so if you open up your Bible there, we're ready to go.
All righty, tell you what, Paul, if you'd like to start and just go ahead and finish us up here through the end of the chapter, which is just a handful of verses.
Sure, let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to be reading, and I do read out of the New King James Version during the course of these studies. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, beginning at verse 37, there we read, Nevertheless, he who stands steadfast in his heart, having no necessity, but has power over his own will, and has so determined in his heart that he will keep his virgin, does well. So then he who gives her in marriage does well, but he who does not give her in marriage does better. A wife is bound by law as long as her husband lives, but if her husband dies, she is at liberty to be married to whomever she wishes, only in the Lord. Actually, that says whom she wishes, only in the Lord. But she is happier if she remains as she is, according to my judgment, and I think I also have the Spirit of God.
Hey, Paul, back up real quick and read for us verse 36.
I kept going back and forth. I'm sorry. I'll go and pick up verse 36. It says, "But if any man thinks he is behaving improperly toward his virgin, if she is past the flower of her youth, and thus it must be, let him do what he wishes. He does not sin. Let them marry."
Okay, thank you, Paul. What we have to keep in mind here is everything that he says here within this context, he says it within the context of what he has already said earlier. So if there's a thought, if there's a question about whether or not a virgin should marry, whether or not a person should marry in general, and Paul says, you know, I really don't think you should, it's all within the context of the challenges, as we talked about last week, that would be coming upon them, whether it be the literal present distress of Nero's persecution, or looking forward toward, not forward to, well, yeah, looking ahead to Domitian's persecution, or just in general the things that they were facing, living in a very idolistic world. Either way, all those comments that sound negative towards getting married must be kept within that understanding. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
All
we
right, so
discussed last time that he mentions a present distress, and there's some different ideas about what that may be, but he's certainly dealing with a circumstantial thing
yeah.
as he talks about that.
Now, by the way, if my camera appears to shake, I've got my laptop set on a card table, and every time I go to type, I shake the table. It's not overtly sturdy.
You guys have had some earthquakes out there recently, haven't you?
We have. So it's who knows? Y'all might see one if it happens today, or me typing one or the other. Now when we after the program last week, we had a brief discussion. Daniel, I think it was over. Was it 36 or 37?
Really, 36 through 38.
Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and look at that here, 36 through 38 there. When he says, "But if any man thinks he is behaving improperly towards his virgin," do you think the improperly is saying it's him not allowing? Okay, back up for just a minute. Daniel, I'm going to throw this to you. Explain the two different ways to look at this section based on the Greek words and the translations that we used. I think it'd be better because it does alter kind of the fundamental point within these three verses.
Absolutely. And what happens is really when you get to verse 38, it talks about, so then he who marries his betrothed, there's a Greek word there that can mean gives her in marriage as well. So herein lies the problem. Until about, I don't know, maybe 50 years ago, we thought this word only meant to give in marriage, so it obviously was talking about a father and daughter. But recent studies into papyri and more use of Koine Greek in these endings show that it can be used synonymously with just to marry in general. In verse 36, you look at the context and it says he's not behaving properly. That word there really denotes immoral behavior, and you're not looking at any immoral behavior by a father towards his daughter without choosing not to marry her. And so that would lead towards maybe a fiance is the context here. So you'll notice if you have an English Standard Version, a New International Version, or a New Living Translation, this will read of a fiance and her the person she's engaged to, rather than a father-daughter situation. And then what you'll notice also in verse 36, instead of saying past her prime or past the bloom of youth, it'll say if his, speaking of the betrothed person, passions are strong. And so really either these are an option, but it seems like searches into Greek and more studies that it seems to lean towards a fiance, and the fiance, I think, is also how you say the guy as well. But
Daniel, for clarity's sake, go ahead and read verses 36 to 38 in the English Standard Version. I have it up on the screen now.
Sure, it'll say this: if anyone thinks that he is not behaving properly towards his betrothed, if his passions are strong, and it has to be, let him do as he wishes. Let him marry. It is no sin. But whoever is firmly established in his heart, being under no necessity, but having his desire under control, and has determined this in his heart to keep her as his betrothed, he will do well. So then he who marries his betrothed does well, and he who refrains from marriage will do even better.
Okay. So let's kind of take a little bit different approach to this. Whenever I remember studying this when I was younger, especially from the King James, and it's always been the understanding that if a father doesn't want to let his daughter, who is a virgin, marry, then that would be fine. But so the other way, based on what the ESV renders and others, suggests then that if you have a man who is betrothed to a woman, if he chooses to marry her, then that's fine. Let him go ahead and marry her. There is no sin. However, if he chooses not to marry her, then that is acceptable as well, not to marry her. Is she still his betrothed if he chooses not to marry? Or are we looking at a cultural thing where the marriage is arranged? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, maybe we gather a few thoughts on that. I'll just give some of my thinking. As you look at this, I'm not sure exactly which he's referring to. I've always looked at this as, a father who would encourage his daughter to marry or not to marry, and maybe even in different cultures, he might even have the ability to say, I won't give her in marriage, and so she wouldn't marry. But as you look at this, in either case, really the conclusion is the same. The bottom line is the same. Paul's talking about whether someone who is not married, whether this is a good time for them to enter into that kind of relationship, or whether it will be better because of that present distress for them not to enter into that. And whether you're talking about a father, you're talking about someone who's considering marriage, there are multiple considerations. One is the present distress and whether that should go forward or not. The other is the passions that are involved in having a young person who may be subject to wanting to give in to some temptations that they have to abstain from. And so there has to be a figuring out of that, whichever way you look at this. I'm not sure there's a really, in the bottom line, a big difference there.
Right.
Doesn't multiple meaning.
If I can oversimplify it, in either way you translate it, the point is, if you marry, you do well. If you don't marry, you do even better. That would be the oversimplification. Obviously, there's much more details than that, but if I could sum it up, those points are made, as Paul said, regardless of whether you translate this as a father-daughter or a fiancé and her betrothed.
Yeah, and it was because of the present circumstance. One interesting observation that I thought about as I'd never heard the point that Daniel made. I mean, it is something to give consideration to, especially in light of verse 9 of this chapter that we dealt with earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Where he talks about it is better to marry than to burn with passion. Or at least the with passion is in parentheses, but that's the idea that this would tie into that idea if it was the idea of the betrothed. Of course, that also leads to the question of the binding of a betrothed contract. Is it a period of engagement? Is it something that you can get out of?
And in the society, being betrothed to somebody was legally engaged to them. And so in this instance, during that legal engagement, you're not married, but yet you're kind of committed to them in some way. And you would often have what seemingly here is long periods of time in engagement where the woman's just sitting there going, are you going to marry me or are you not going to marry me? And you see that even in society today. There are probably some women that have boyfriends or fiancés who won't decide, and they're just sitting there in limbo. And he says in here, either decision you make is fine, but these are your options.
Well, when you think about the entirety of the chapter, it would fit for it to be talking about a decision between a man and a woman. I mean, if you go back to the beginning, it's addressing the husband, it's addressing the wife, and it's addressing the one who is married to an unbeliever. It's addressing the one whose unbeliever has left. if the way we're looking at it is the case, then it's addressing the one who's betrothed to, and the one who is subject to the betrothal. And so, I mean, that would fit the way he's having this discussion here, instead of stepping out and now let's talk to fathers a minute about your virgin daughters, you know. But I mean, just kind of a thought there in the continuity of it. It would fit this continuity stream a little bit better. But I agree. I mean, the fundamental simplistic point is, and really all of this is a very simple point.
Yeah.
You know, if you're married, don't divorce. If you are married, if you're not married, you don't have to get married. Matter of fact, it may be better for you not to be married, based on the distress.
Randall,
any thoughts or comments about that?
yeah, Randall just posted something in our chat there.
All right, let me bring that up here.
Do you have the ability to do that, John?
Yep. Hopefully it'll be big enough for everybody to read.
Okay.
I may try to expand it a little bit more.
And I have a little bit different understanding, even if you're looking at the father-daughter relationship, than what Randall does, but I appreciate his comment here.
Yes.
He says, the problem I have with the father-daughter relationship versus the fiancé-betrothed relationship is that the father-daughter relationship brings with it an incest connotation, which I do not believe the text is trying to make. So I think Daniel accurately explained the text using the ESV, and I think when we look at that, he's looking at I had the phrase in my mind earlier.
Well, if you read this,
he does not sin, I think, is maybe what he's looking at there.
If you read this in the ESV and you try to apply the father-daughter relationship, then actually you're right. There is the connotation of incest. If you read it from the New King James, it doesn't quite bear out that connotation.
Right. Yeah.
Is that what you're kind of saying, Paul?
Yeah.
Okay.
I thought about that when he mentioned that, and he says, again, it shows that we are getting better with translating and understanding the Koine Greek. The Word of God gets clearer and clearer for us in the English language today. I don't believe that all those folks up until apparently 50 years ago didn't have the ability to know the truth on this. It may have been a nuance there that was a little bit different. And as you look at this, Paul's point is consistent throughout this chapter. It's better because of what the Spirit has revealed to him about the circumstances of that day. He is delivering a message that it would be better for them not to marry. But people who marry and have a right to marry don't sin in doing that. It's just that Paul thinks that they would be happier. It would be easier for them to remain faithful. It would be better for them to not be married in that scenario.
Yeah, that makes sense. Any thoughts about that? And like I said, I agree with Randall's point. I mean, if we're looking at this with a better understanding of the Greek than with what we have developed through the years, then absolutely, this would have to be the fiancé and betrothed.
And also, I think part of it is so much with the New King James, with them translating behaving improperly. What people read that in the New King James is they think, oh, he's just, he's not being a good dad. If he feels like he's not being a good dad. But that's not what it means. It means if he thinks he's behaving indecently. All right, so that's denoting immoral behavior. And so that's the incestual connotation that the New King James doesn't bring out, because obviously that's what the Greek word means. So that was the point my dad was trying to make, I believe.
That is an interesting point. I want to look at something here real quick, and then we'll continue on, because I had missed that before. And you that he behaveth himself uncomely towards his virgin. In this context, the Greek word that's used here, and you referenced this, how would you pronounce it? Askemoneo? That sounds right? Askemoneo.
You gotta with the key.
Okay. Anyway.
The New American Standard says, but if any man thinks he is acting unbecomingly toward his virgin daughter, if she should be of full age, and if it must be so, let him do what he wishes.
Yeah.
He does not sin.
Yeah,
For
a
the
Thayer
marriage.
says to act unbecomingly, and Strong's Enhanced Dictionary basically says the same thing. But what you're saying is the actual word itself is not so much improper behavior, but improper in a relationship that should not exist.
Hmm.
Okay, okay. Um, Interesting. I just thought I'd look at that. I had
It's not explicit, but it's certainly implicit there.
yeah. Well, and that makes sense. That makes sense, and I could see that better in the context of um, fiance to betrothed.
And notice
Yeah.
too, it's not that he's not thinking, oh, he's leading her to bad decisions by keeping her from marriage. That's not the point. He says it's toward her, and so that is the connotation there. So.
That's a good point. I really think that that either of those would work. I tend to think that what he's going to be talking about here is the betrothed to the fiance. You choose to marry her, great, go ahead. If you choose not to marry her, that's fine too. I do see the evidence a little bit stronger for that than the father preventing his virgin daughter from getting married, for sure. But again, other people may disagree with that. And the overall simplistic point, as Daniel pointed out, it's okay to get married. It's okay not to get married. Might even be better not to get married, depending on the situation. All right, any thoughts or comments about that before we continue? All right, let's go ahead and bring verses 39 and 40 into this, kind of pulling this particular section here to a close. He says a wife is bound by law as long as her husband lives, but if her husband dies, she is at liberty to be married to whom she wishes, only in the Lord. But she is happier if she remains as she is, according to my judgment. And I think also I have the Spirit of God. All right, so let's start with verse 39 and kind of pull this to a conclusion. This starts kind of the way it began when you go up to the first section. And the point is, a wife is not to leave her husband, and a husband is not to leave his wife. This lines up with his explanation of the law and how long the law applies in Romans 7, and using the marriage bond there as an example. And just in case anyone is thinking that a widow cannot marry, Paul is clearly saying that a widow can marry. Maybe covering the last of the questions they had for him, possibly. Any thoughts, though, as we look at verse 39? Okay, I'm going to throw this one out there. So, to whom she wishes, only in the Lord. All right, it's been understood through the years that this is talking about marrying only someone who is a Christian. The problem I have with that is all marriage that is recognized by God is in the Lord. Okay? If you've got two people who aren't Christians and they're getting married for the first time, they are bound together by God. I mean, their marriage is recognized by God. If not, then we end up saying that only the marriages of Christians are recognized by God. And that poses a grave problem when you go back to the beginning and Jesus' authoritative reference to that in Matthew chapter 19, verse 9. But what do you think? Do you think there's more argumentation for saying that this means she can only marry a Christian? Or do you think it would be more accurate to say that she can only marry someone who is qualified to be married?
We don't apply that same thinking toward children and fathers. Children, Ephesians 6 tells us, children, obey your parents in the Lord. And
Okay.
we don't say that only children, the children should only obey parents if the parents are Christians. But we understand that in that passage to mean that we're to, in the Lord means that as they direct them in the right ways, that we ought to obey God rather than men. If you can obey your parents and that they instruct you in what the right ways of the Lord are, then you do that. And as you look in this passage, I think that marriage has to be something that's approved of, is acceptable when it comes to what the Lord has to say about it. But I'd be happy to hear what anyone else says.
Yeah, and the problem is when we get into the English discussion, we try to attach the same endings to it and think that it keeps the same understanding. If I say print it out, that's a much different phrase than if I say throw it out. Those are two different. It changes the connotation of what it out means, and so with the expression, for instance, in the Lord, when you attach it to Mary, I've got all my dictionaries back there: Bedad, Kittle's Exegetical Dictionary of the New Testament, Theological Dictionary of the New Testament, and then up there also TD, or something like that. But all of them will say this expression means a Christian here. So I'm just going to go with the people who know what Greek is, and they say it means a Christian, and so I see here a restriction for these widows. It's not a restriction for all people, but it is a restriction here for widows to marry Christians. That's what God has instructed them to do.
So I assume that based on that, the point would be that since we're talking about those who are Christians and they know better, they know the dangers of being married to an unbeliever, if you're going to marry, make sure you do it right this time.
So I'm going to clarify. I'll ask a question here for those. I know that Randall's expressed a thought in the chat as well. I'm reading here that she's at liberty to marry whom she wishes, only in the Lord. So here we have a prohibition that she would be sinning if she married some. That's not what I'm saying. Those who believe this means that she can only marry a Christian. She would be sinning if she married someone who was not a Christian. Is that an accurate question there?
Yeah.
If we're viewing Paul's statement here, especially if it's not a matter of judgment, as the last verse references, then it's a command, and for a widow to marry someone who's not a Christian would be a sin.
Yeah.
If it's a matter of judgment, based on, as in verse 40, then she wouldn't be sinning if the in the Lord references to someone who's a Christian. Paul, you said we got some comments in the chat room?
Yeah, Randall has a few.
How far back do you want to go?
Joshua also had something up there, but yeah.
Do you want to go back to, I'm not talking about what people did or didn't understand, I'm talking about translations?
We can do that because I think there was a clarification there.
Okay.
I
goes back
appreciate
a few minutes in our study, but I think it'd be good to bring it in. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I had said that, and let me clarify something I said something about people 50 years ago, or prior to 50 years ago, that they would not have been able to understand this. And certainly Randall makes a good point here. And all I meant was that we can get the fundamental point regardless of that. And I appreciate Randall a lot in the comments he's making. He says, I'm not talking about what people did or didn't understand. I'm talking about translations. The King James Version translates the word Passover as Easter, and certainly that's incorrect. It was many years after the translation for people to find that error and correct it, and that's absolutely right. Randall says further, I don't think either interpretation of 1 Corinthians and that we are talking about, either one of those ideas alters the text. However, I was stating why I understood the way I did, and I appreciated those good things that he had to say. Brian says that he thinks they're excellent points, and he's digesting those. And Josh Thornhill says, I know of one who believes that verse to say that she cannot marry regardless of the situation. And
let's talk about the only in the Lord.
Probably in a response to something I said here, Randall says, can you think of a scenario where it would be good for a Christian widow to marry a non-Christian man? And that's a very good question. Randall further says, I'm not saying that the marriage is not sanctified once completed, but I'm talking about the contemplation of being in a marriage bond to an unbeliever. And then I think there's one more, no question mark. He says, which one of you preachers sitting on this panel would encourage a Christian woman, widow or not, to marry a non-Christian man? And he says, again, once married, if they have the scriptural right to be married, it is sanctified by God. I'm talking about the contemplation of marriage.
Yeah.
As you read here, it says that she's, however you're going to look at that, she's at liberty to be married to whom she wishes, only in the Lord. And so,
Right.
it seems to me that if you are understanding that, there is a prohibition, and I guess the question is whether she sins or doesn't sin.
Right.
First off, let me be first to say, just because a command doesn't make perfect sense to me does not mean that it's not a command. Okay?
Right.
So I want to preface that. And in my studies of the scriptures, and I've had many discussions with people who believe that a Christian should not marry anyone who is not a Christian. If I could prove 100% from the New Testament that it's absolutely wrong for a Christian to marry a non-Christian first time around, then it would be easier for me then to take this passage here and say, well, yeah, it just makes sense that a widow Christian has to marry someone who is a Christian. However, if it can't be proven, even though it may be the best idea in the world for a Christian to marry another Christian, if it can't be proven that that's a command of God, then it kind of begs the question, is this therefore then a command that only applies to widows? Okay. I don't know. To me, I agree. When we think about it from a reasoning standpoint, then yes, absolutely, it's not a wise idea at all. Matter of fact, I do know one lady who was a member of the church. As far as I knew, her and her family were very faithful. When her husband passed away some years later, she ended up remarrying, and now she is a member of a Baptist church. Okay. Poor judgment, absolutely. She was not strong enough to begin with in the first place. But it's just difficult for me to say that this would be a command that must not be broken. I would tend to go along with Randall's comment there that in context this is Paul's judgment, especially thinking about verse 40 that he is an apostle, so his judgment's going to be pretty wise. But to forbid a widow woman from marrying someone who's not a Christian.
Well, notice this. I know you guys are kind of caught up on the word, this is my judgment. Notice that in the same way he says she's free to be married, the same freeness that you give is the same phrase he uses the restriction in, if I'm not mistaken. So if you're going to say his freedom is a God-divine given command, the restriction is in the same sentence. You can't say, well, they've got all the freedom, but the other part's a judgment. Well, if the freedom's in that same sentence, then the freedom's just an opinion of Paul's too. He just thinks they're free to marry, but he thinks they should do it if they're Christian. So does he really think they should marry, or is that a true statement there? If that's a true statement, then it's also a true statement that they only should do it, marry a Christian there.
Right.
Okay, yeah, when he says, but if her husband dies, she is at liberty to be married, that's not a judgment call, that's a fact.
Right.
Right. The
So
only in the Lord would be a fact. The fact that she's bound to her husband as long as she lives is a fact. His judgment is she's happier if she remains unmarried.
Yeah.
That's his opinion, right?
It would
there.
have to be, you say a fact, I would more use the term condition. Only in the Lord is a condition upon which she would be at liberty to be married.
Right.
But it's the same thing, though. It's just a little bit different wording there.
But the other challenge I see in this, and I knew we kind of mentioned this a little bit, is the point that it also says to whom she wishes, which is a broad statement. So I mean, this is one of those passages, like it or not, I believe is open to interpretation either way.
Well,
I mean,
it's the same language in Genesis chapter 2 or 3 when God says you can eat of any tree in the garden except the tree of good. Well, he said any tree. Well, of course, he made a restriction within that. It was any tree except one. So she's free to marry except it has to be in the Lord. That's anybody who's a Christian, she's allowed to marry. That's his restriction. So that's how you would read that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but now the other question that I would ask on that, and
the freedom is not freedom of choice. The freedom is she's free from her previous marriage. That's the freedom there.
That's the point.
So let's read that as she's free to marry, like free to marry. She's free from her husband. That's the freedom there.
And I understand that. I don't know if I'm opening a can of worms in saying this.
No, we've done that, so go ahead.
Would that say, though, if you make the statement that they are sinning, would that mean that the marriage is not recognized by God because he has commanded a Christian widow to only marry a Christian? Therefore, does he recognize...
That's the logical conclusion in my understanding.
Is she violating?
I think that's the logical consequence of saying that.
Yeah, what you're asking, is she violating in the same way as someone who does not have a right to marry? Does she not? If she does not have a right to marry a non-Christian?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. I don't know. I'm not sure I know the answer here. I'm just trying to clarify.
Yeah, and of course, Randall twice, and I totally agree with this. In his comments, Randall twice emphasized that regardless, the marriage is sanctified by God, because if you're legally not married, you have a right to marry somebody that you have a right to marry. Somebody that's not unscripturally divorced is the main point that I'm making.
Now let me ask you a question, Daniel, and because sure. I've just glanced over at the Greek words for this, and it's not incredibly complicated. Could we be looking at a reference to authority, as in whenever we see the term "in the name of"?
Yeah, but Dad lists this as a marker of close association within a limit. Marrying the Lord equals marry a Christian. So the phrase there is a marker of close association within a limit with the person she's marrying. So
instead of viewing it as only in the authority of the Lord, it would be only in the Lord himself? See, that's kind of my question. I kind of see it as pointing to the authority, therefore, to whom, she can marry whomever she wills as long as it's within the authority of what Christ has established. Because, see, the thing is if we're looking, and we've got some comments we'll bring up here in the chat room in just a second, all marriages are bound by God, but marriages, of course, do not save. All scriptural marriages are bound by God, but all marriages do not save. So if you got two people who are lost in sin, if they get married, our understanding is they're still bound together by God, although they're in their lost state. There's nowhere I found in the scriptures that would suggest that if two Christians get married, they are in a special relationship with God in their marriage that two people who are lost are not in. This would almost suggest, if we look at it this way, that, yeah, a widow who marries another Christian, they have a special relationship that exists within the Lord that two people who have been married for 40 years don't have. Does that make sense, or does that just seem like it came out of thin air?
No, I understand what you're saying, but I think you're looking at this as like by the authority of, as in the name of the Lord. The name is not here. It doesn't say in the name of the Lord.
Well, I was doing a little study on in the Lord.
But what I will say is I don't think us drawing the conclusion, seeing what the conclusion will be, and then seeing complications with that conclusion is a good way to then dismiss what the phrase means.
Right.
That to me poses complications in just how we go about things. Just because we, and myself included, I don't think I have a perfect answer to that. But I think, not saying, oh, I don't have a perfect answer to it, so I'm going to just understand it a completely different way than Paul meant it, I don't think is a good reasoning in general.
Right, yeah.
No, I agree completely, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But
I'm not a Greek scholar, but I was just looking, I did a quick, because computers make this so easy, I did a quick study on in the Lord, and I see it being, I was going to make the point that it doesn't refer to relationships like that, but it really does. Daniel, when we look at some of the people who are referred to in the New Testament, Greet Rufus, chosen in the Lord, in Romans 16, and there's, I had some others pulled up here, and I'm not seeing them right now, but as Paul sends greetings, he refers to some individuals as being in the Lord, and so that would kind of support that thinking of being a person. but there's also sometimes actions that are done in the Lord, or scenarios that are in the Lord. And nevertheless, Paul said says in chapter 11, nevertheless, neither is man independent of woman, nor woman independent of man in the Lord. And so,
and also I'll say, for instance, I know Ephesians 6:1 was referenced, obey your parents in the Lord. The in the Lord is not connected to with the parents' instruction. It's not obey them, and if they are doing things and give you rules that agree with God's rules. That's not the point. The in the Lord is connected with the obedience of the children. Children, because of your close association with God, obey your parents. That's what that phrase means. And so even in that phrase, it's not talking about by the authority of, it's talking about the association that they have with the Lord.
Let's go ahead and throw the chat room comments up here real quick. And by the way, I do want to reiterate that we are not looking to justify a preconceived thought. We're simply trying to consider within the context what Paul is saying. I mean, if Paul if this is a command forbidding a widow from marrying someone who's not a Christian, then it's a command, period. If it's not, it's not. It's not a matter of, I'm not a widow looking to get married and I found a non-Christian wife and I'm wanting to marry him. So let's go ahead, Paul, and let's see. Let me throw it to you and start with. I've already asked kind of Randall's question for him about the Greek, and so Daniel has talked about that some.
Sure. And he says, remember, we only need one verse to get authority. I agree with that. Why does Paul target widows? Maybe because they were vulnerable. Maybe, like John pointed out, with the widow who married and became a Baptist. And the question is, what does in the Lord mean? And I had not seen his statement. That's kind of what I was going after. Once we clarify that, that answers the question. And I was trying to understand it, by the way, in context of other passages that use that phrase.
Yeah.
And what does Mounts say?
He's a dictionary. He's basically an updated Vines. That's what he is.
Okay. And I don't know. And does that bring us up to speed, John?
Yes, I think that's the last one. Yeah. I think everybody else in the chat room is probably exercising a bit of judgment and saying, let's see what these hillbillies have to say about it.
Yeah. Let's not go on record. No. Yeah.
No.
Yeah, I was going to say, of course, the challenge I see in all of this is, this may sound, I'll just say it anyways.
Go ahead, Tom.
In the Lord, I'm not convinced, and I may be wrong with this. I'm not convinced yet that you could bind the only option there being a Christian. Again, I need to study the expression more and so on. I'm not fully convinced. Now, no, I have to be very clear about this. I totally agree with Randall. I don't think there's a wise circumstance on this earth, widow, not widow, whatever the circumstance, where a Christian should marry a non-Christian. And when is there sin involved in the Christian marrying a non-Christian? Not in the relationship, as in it being not recognized by God, but there is still poor judgment, which could be sin within itself. And obviously it's going to lead to a whole lot more.
Poor judgment wouldn't be sin in and of itself unless the poor judgment led to sin.
Yeah.
That's what you meant.
And I understand it. But of course, the point that I'm making is there may be some type of attitude associated with it. Somebody, I don't care. They're not a Christian. I don't care. I'm going to marry him anyways. Kind of rebellious. I mean, you could have circumstances like that. It's still recognized by God, and you're going to be bound by it. Period. And in this circumstance, I totally agree. You ought to marry a Christian. And one of the things I see in this, when I tie all of this into everything that we've talked about in 1 Corinthians 7. Everything that has been discussed with the present distresses, talking about the unbelieving husband leaving, and the not being under bondage from the standpoint of not being obligated to fulfill your marital responsibilities in that circumstance. I think you might be dealing with somebody here who is a widow who has maybe been in a circumstance where they've had difficulties because they stood for what was right. And I think Paul's saying, don't make the mistake again. Or don't make a mistake. Learn from it.
But that's possible. But like you said, it is an assumption.
Right.
But am I understanding that there's a prevalent thought that Ephesians 6:1 ought to say, "Children in the Lord, obey your parents"?
Say again.
Ephesians 6:1. There was some clarification offered on that. Every translation I find says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord."
Mm-hmm.
But it seems to me that there's a thought that it ought to say, "Children in the Lord, obey your parents."
No, the in the Lord is connected with obedience, not parents. So in English, it's closer to parents, but the phrase is connected with obedience. That being, children, because of your close association with the Lord, obey your parents. So that's kind of the point.
I was trying to help understand one passage by looking at another.
So. Does that make sense? At least what I'm saying, not that you have to agree, but does that make sense? Okay.
I think so.
I'll say this.
Yeah.
I know you're looking at translations with that particular verse, but just like John 3:16, who knows if that verse will ever be changed, because everybody knows that verse, and so people keep it translated the way it is, regardless of ambiguity, because it's a popular verse. So.
Well, let me bring it back to this, guys. Since our goal is to factor the truth into our daily lives, if you find yourself, and I'm going to say this would apply to widowers as well, not simply widows, although that's the only one that Paul addresses here. But it would have to apply both ways, don't you think? To a husband whose wife has died, just as it would to a wife whose husband has died. Or in the strictness of it,
I personally don't see it this way, in the sense that I see this as a restriction that's specific to widows.
That's kind of the question. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, we have to be careful, because when like we talk about divorce, Matthew talks only about a man putting away his wife, but yet Mark comes in and throws, I believe it's Mark that throws both sides, into this. Although he does not, he specifically talks about a woman being bound to her husband as long as he lives. If he dies, she can marry whomever she wishes only in the Lord.
And that's what I don't think wife and husband are always used interchangeably. For instance, in 1 Timothy chapter 3, when it talks about the qualifications of elders, he has to be the husband of a wife. That doesn't mean, it could be a wife of a husband. Those rules are interchangeable. And so I think your Matthew Mark is a perfect example to show that God does cover both sides in those instances. In verse 39, though, he specifically points out widows. I don't know why exactly. Maybe it's because in this society, men had much more control over women than possibly they do in the United States, for instance, and so they could physically keep them away. They could legally keep them away from church, from God, just in general. I don't know why exactly. Because God didn't reveal the necessary why, but he seems to just
apply
be
to
pointing
widowers
this
also.
Say again?
Does this apply to widowers also, you think?
That was my question.
I don't think so.
If we look at this the way we kind of looked at Corinthians, Paul is answering some questions that were submitted to him. There may have been people saying, look, you got a widow, and since the widow's already been married once, the widow can't marry again.
Mm-hmm.
And Paul's saying, yes, you can.
Mm-hmm.
And so I tell you what, let's I'm not going to say let's agree to disagree on this, but but let's look at this like has already been stated several times. A widow, just Paul has explained, yes, a widow can marry, but because of the present distress and everything that's going on, as he's already expressed, it may be better for her not to marry. But in this case in point, if she chooses to marry, then she has got to marry someone that is going to take care of her and help her to continue her path as a Christian. If only in the Lord means that, then so be it. But anything else outside of that would be, at best, poor judgment, and at worst, sin. And for those of us who are not widows looking for someone to marry, let's be thankful for the situation that we have. If we are a widow looking to marry, we need to ask ourselves the question: in the next 10 years I've got left in life, 20 years, will this person help me get to heaven? And if this person's not going to help me to get to heaven, then I don't need to spend my twilight years with someone who's going to try to hinder me from going to heaven. You know, that applies judgment, that applies wisdom on our part.
And I think as far as our advice, you know, just all four of us, that would be our advice for just anybody getting married, young, old, you know, widow, widower, no matter the circumstance.
Yeah, we are in 100% agreement. You ought to marry a Christian.
Yeah.
Period.
Now, I will say that I have seen many families. Now, granted, I've seen the opposite side of this coin too, and it's pretty ugly. But I have seen many families whose spouse obeyed the gospel after they got married. Had the person said, "I'll never marry you until you become a Christian," the person may never have obeyed the gospel. You know, so there are times that you know, people have gone against the advice, but their resolve was as such, and I think they knew the person well enough to know that they just needed time and they would obey. But my judgment says
that is so dangerous.
Let's try to convert the person before you have this lifelong commitment with them.
Yeah, that is so dangerous. So dangerous.
I know that we're a little bit past the top of the hour. I also know that we stopped. We started a little bit late, though. But I didn't want for us to close out today without letting the comments in the chat room to be heard, starting with Brian Haynes.
Yes, let me back up and find that, because you're right. There's
two good comments there, I think, and I just wouldn't want to close out today without and say we left those out or something.
Well, and we'll be able to finish this chapter here because the latter part of 40 is very simple. So, okay, I've got Brian's brought up there, Paul.
He says, on a similar vein, I've been studying Ezekiel's temple image, which is of course the church. In that image, God says that the priests would be allowed to marry only virgins and widows of priests, Ezekiel 14:22. At the time, this passage, 1 Corinthians 7, came to mind, and that's I'll have to do some studying on that.
Yeah.
And further, he says the difficulty I have. This is Randall. The difficulty I have with it is that I believe it says to marry. However, if I take that position, now I have two exceptions to God's marriage law, and that scares me to death. So it can't mean that, and I need to do more study to reconcile this, because God's law only gives one reason for divorce, and that is the sexual immorality. The way I understand this is that I would have to add, if a widow married a the way I understand this is that I would have to add, if a widow married a non-Christian. That is the slippery slope I am on, so back to the books. And I have to tell you, Randall, that I am in a similar boat with you as far as studying this out. It's caused me to think about some things today when I expressed at the very beginning of this, I did not have any thought that it would be among those who are here controversial. And I continue to study, and I continue to try to find out the truth. And when I know the truth, I will teach it boldly. So that's, I'm in the same situation. I'm going to continue studying and make sure that I have a good handle on this.
Well, see, that's the thing about Bible study, is you have to weigh everything with what everything already says. And if you take a position on any given verse, if you take a position, then you have to see how far the ripples go, and what will this position alter understanding of other passages. I mean, this is more of an oversimplified example, but if I take the position that baptism is not necessary for salvation, then how many other Bible passages does that have to change?
Yeah.
And so if we have a case in point where marrying someone in this case in point, who is not a Christian becomes a sin, then what other Bible passages are we going to have to adjust? And if we have to adjust them, we have to adjust them. That's the thing. If we end up having to say, well, therefore then you have a case in point where someone can scripturally marry, but if they do scripturally marry, God's not going to recognize their marriage because it's not in the Lord. I mean, you have to say, okay, that's the position, and I'm going to embrace the ripple effect and the other changes that would have to be adjusted to make the point. So I appreciate the point that Randall's on. I mean, it's a challenge. It's a challenge, and I'm willing to say, if it truly means only to marry a Christian, then so be it.
Exactly.
Once I see that, that's what it's got. That's what it means. If it means something a little bit different, then so be it as well. Truth is truth, no matter what we think. It's just the understanding, coming to the understanding of that truth. But she is happier if she remains as she is, according to my judgment, Paul says. So if a widow chooses not to marry, that's fine, based on the context of verse 39.
And I will say this, in verse 40, if there are widows listening to this who are thinking about marriage, understand that although Paul says this is his opinion, the fact that he includes the fact that he has the Spirit, I would seriously consider Paul's advice if you're in that situation. I don't think this is just a slight passerby like, that's just kind of my opinion. But I think he's really serious about this advice to the widows here in this situation. Of course, you would couple this with his instruction with Timothy and Titus when he's talking about instruction to young widows that he would advise them to get married. But if you're in this situation and discussing or deciding on a situation of whether to marry as a widow, seriously consider Paul's advice in this matter.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And let me real quickly add to that.
Mm-hmm.
We've discussed two different scenarios here in this circumstances. Again, I believe I can say with confidence all four of us are in agreement which one is the safe path to follow down.
Oh, sure.
Marry a Christian. Yeah. Period. There's no doubts. There's no doubts with that.
One minor question, then we'll pull the study to a close. Actually, I'll have a secondary question for you that we'll have to decide real quick here. Do you think that it's better when talking about Paul's statements, such as what verse 40 says, it's better to view it not as an opinion, but as a judgment based on facts? We can make a judgment based on facts, whereas the judgment may not necessarily be binding, but it is a wise judgment, whereas opinions tend to be less subjected to established facts.
I have an opinion about that.
Opinions are just, I think. Yeah.
But now I will say that when I look at this, I actually was comparatively reading. I know some other translations actually use the word opinion. I'm very uncomfortable with saying this was Paul's opinion. It's my understanding that he's saying that I have the Spirit of God. I have a message from God. And because of our present circumstances, because of the things that are happening, here are some instructions I give to you. I think it's very much like his interaction with the Ephesian elders when he called them to Miletus. And he says, I'm not going to see your face anymore. And it's been told to me that wherever I go, there's going to be struggles and trials and beatings and things of that nature. And so Paul, because the Spirit of God had revealed things that were going to happen to him, he gives those instructions to the Ephesian elders about how they are to be good elders, and they are to watch out for that flock, and that there's some things that they're going to have to face. Here he talks about people in marriages, that because the Spirit of God had revealed some things to him, they need to be prepared for the circumstances, the situations that are going to come up. And he says it'd be better for you not to have to be married in those circumstances. That's how I'm viewing it, not as just, here's my whim, here's my opinion, or just my personal thoughts about the matter even, right. But instead what the Spirit of God revealed to him based upon the circumstances that were going to transpire.
All right. Any other thoughts on that? Okay, here's my next question, guys. Since we finished 7, and our study next week would be followed by 3 weeks of absence. Do we want to start chapter 8 next week, or would this be a good time just to say let's make it 4 weeks and resume in August?
I don't think. Again, I'm full of opinions today. I don't
What's your
think that
judgment?
we're. I don't think that we were going to probably cover 13 verses next week, regardless of if they're simple or hard. And I think it might be good for us to go ahead and just say we're going to break for the rest of the month of July and come back and meet in August.
All right. What are your thoughts, Daniel?
I'm torn. I would really like to study next week, but I understand that breaking in the middle of a chapter would be, we would basically have to recap everything. We got
Especially with that long of a break.
right.
You know, we could skip a week and it not be too difficult. But Tom, what are your thoughts?
My thoughts are in agreement with you. The other thing is there's no certainty with next week with you either. So we may be in a circumstance where there may be problems logistically too. So
Yeah.
so I would say just do it for a month.
A number of times in this book, Paul says now concerning, and he will talk about a new topic. And it seems like there's a natural break in chapter 8 and verse 1 where we would, as Daniel pointed out, we would not have to recap, but instead we could pick up
Could
with
we
a
do
brand
some
new
type
topic.
of topical study or something just to be able to do a study? Or
I mean, I'm game with that. Then if something falls through the crack and I can't get on board, then the three of y'all could walk through it.
Mhm.
Well, if we did that, we could talk about it once we go off air here and decide. I tell you what, let's do for everybody else sitting here. We will still plan to have our study next week, but watch your emails if you subscribe to the list. Watch the Facebook if you subscribe to the Facebook, and if nothing else, jump on board next week and look at the chat.
Yeah, we'll keep you informed.
Yeah, and then that way we go ahead and end the day study and not keep you hanging there. And then we'll talk about this for a few minutes afterwards. So anyway, thank you so much for joining us today. Gentlemen, any final thoughts or comments? And let's kind of make this rather quickly. And we'll throw it to you, Paul.
I wanted to apologize to the three of you that are on this study that I have been distracted a couple of times and have not switched the camera properly. And so someone else is talking and you're having to be on camera, and so I apologize for that. Join us again next time, and if for some reason we're not meeting, we'll see you in a month after that.
All right, Daniel?
I just appreciate everybody's time, and I love studying with all my good brothers here and also those in the chat room, and just thank you for taking this time out of your day to do so. One of my favorite times of the week, so thank you, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Absolutely. And Tom?
Right. Also, thank you. We've had a very lively discussion today, and one of the wonderful things about studying with others is it gives us the opportunity to think about things, and in some instances rethink. So let's kind of do that a little bit.
Absolutely. And I tell you what, who knows? We may talk about other usages of the term in the Lord and how that might be used. It might be something for a future study, just for greater clarity. Thank you so much for joining us. If you'd like to contact us, you can send all your questions or comments, if you'd like to questions@truthfactor.com, or look at our lower thirds, and if it's visible on your screen, you can contact us each by our first name at truthfactor.com, John, Paul, Daniel, and Tom. And we definitely love to hear from you. We do have one email that was sent to us a couple weeks ago that I personally need to address myself, and just have neglected to do that, so I apologize for that to the one who sent it. Thank you so much, and Lord willing, we'll see you back here next Wednesday which should be the 9th, I think. No. Yes, the 9th at 11 o'clock a.m. Central Time.
That's noon Eastern Time.
9 o'clock Pacific Time.
And 6 a.m. Hawaii time.
Right here at live.truthfactor.com. Have a wonderful week.